Is Clive Bundy a constitutional folk hero who stood up to an overreaching, heavily armed federal bureaucracy and made the government blink? Or is Bundy a deadbeat scofflaw kook who is almost literally feeding at the public trough? And what did we learn from the standoff in Nevada about the attitude and power of the federal government? I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. And men, this weekend, the federal government's Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, packed up its automatic weapons and helicopters and went home, returning nearly 400 head of cattle to their rightful owner, 68-year-old Clive Bundy, in the latest chapter of a 21-year standoff that nearly erupted into a range war. Bundy, you see, used to pay federal government grazing fees until 1993, when he says that Uncle Sam stopped using that money to improve the rangeland and started buying out ranchers, ostensibly to protect the endangered desert tortoise. The BLM says Bundy owes $1 million in back grazing fees, but Bundy says the land his family's cattle have roamed since the Rutherford B. Hayes administration belongs to Nevada, and that he's all paid up, because the federal government since about 1864 has no right to own Nevada's land, he says. Nevada's Constitution and actual practice would beg to differ. The federal government actually holds title to about, get this, 84% of Nevada's land, and 264 million acres in all 50 states. Now, Stephen Green, a federal district court has ruled in the government's favor and said that the BLM could enforce the law and take Bundy's cattle to pay his grazing fees. So let me ask you, do you little L libertarians believe that an individual should be allowed to nullify the law on his own say-so?
No, he shouldn't. But you know what? This is such a tough case, and that, of course, makes for bad law, and we're starting here with bad law. You know, you started off this segment asking if he was a hero or a scofflaw, and I say, why can't the guy be both? You know, we have a fine American tradition of that, extending back to before the founders. You know, that is what founded this country. That's how people came to this country, were people who didn't respect the laws of the land because they thought those laws were unjust, and they came to this country, this unsettled country, to escape those laws. When those laws followed them across the ocean, we rose up in revolt. We'll revolt now and then. It can be an honorable thing.
Well, Bill Whittle, militia members and fellow ranchers, many of them exercising their right to keep and bear arms, stood with Clive Bundy, even though he's clearly breaking the law. Now, can you just tell these Tea Party kooks that this is not 1775 at Boston Harbor and we're not living under a remote monarch, that these laws were constitutionally established and affirmed by the courts? Or don't you conservatives believe in the rule of law?
Well, it's our belief in the rule of law and legitimacy of this current administration through election that has inhibited us from really taking the kind of action that we probably should take in terms of really understanding the degradation and destruction of our liberties. Count all the amendments in the Bill of Rights, they're all under assault. So I completely agree with Steve on this one. It is a messy case. I feel the same way about this rancher as I feel about the President of the United States and his unique honor. I wish it had happened to a better person. With that said, I think that what we see down there is important, and it may in fact be a milestone. I don't know that I think here's the issue, if I had to describe what I feel about this issue. It may be that the Bureau of Land Management has an excellent case against this guy. But when the Bureau of Land Management comes in with armored up vehicles or whatever, and they have everybody standing there with AR-15s, then the government is at war with the people. The proper method for dealing with this guy, if he does in fact have an outstanding back debt, is to take him to court and to continue to take him to court. The fact that the BLM is showing up with AR-15s, where the federal government is showing up with rifles against other American citizens behind a barricade with the Gadsden flag, also with rifles, is telling me that something fundamentally out of whack has happened with the federal government. I don't know why BLM needs these weapons. I don't know why any of these guys need these kind of weapons. I don't know why the meter maids at LAX have to dress up like Delta operators either, but they do, and it's getting very, very disturbing. And my only final thought on this, Scott, would be, looks like a victory for citizens and for show of force against the federal government. But I couldn't watch those cars leaving without thinking that this is not over, that the federal government is simply going to strike faster next time. And so we'll see what happens in the next chapter on this one, I think.
Well, this is not over is exactly what Senator Harry Reid said about this issue. You know, the BLM closed off a huge chunk of northeast Nevada during the standoff so that they could round up Bundy's cattle without interference. But they did establish a couple of free speech zones to make sure that protesters could speak their minds in a confined area without anybody getting hurt. Now, Stephen, doesn't the establishment of free speech zones show that, in fact, liberty is alive and well in the U.S., and that people who cry about federal tyranny are either ill-informed or simply anarchists?
I will say one thing, just one thing, because I'm seething and I don't trust myself not to say something I really shouldn't say.
Oh, go for
But
it.
with the establishment of the Bill of Rights in this country, we established a free speech zone in the entire country. From
Bingo.
sea to shining sea is a free speech zone. We are
Bingo.
Americans. That is our God-given or creator-given right. And the establishment of a zone just goes to show how far those rights have been trampled in the other 99% of this country. Good Lord, a free speech zone.
Bingo.
Well, Bill, either the federal government owns that land or it doesn't. And every other rancher in the country whose cattle graze so-called public lands have to pay the fees. So Bundy is, in effect, getting a government subsidy for his business. If the BLM backs down permanently in the Bundy case, shouldn't all of those ranchers apply for a grazing fee refund from Washington?
Well, this again is why it's a messy story. I assume that all the facts you laid out are in fact correct. Then yeah, that he doesn't have a right to do this and take advantage of just not paying if everybody else has to pay. But I think a bigger question is this. His point is that the federal government used to use taxes to improve the land. If they're not improving the land anymore, then why are we paying our own government for our own land? In other words, who really owns the land is the point I'm trying to make, right? I mean, isn't the entire idea, Scott, that the government is there to just do a limited amount of business on behalf of the people? It's not that the government owns the land. Barack Obama doesn't own the land. BLM doesn't own the land. The people own the land. That's who the government's supposed to be. It's supposed to be belonging to the people. And if this guy's got cattle to graze, the land doesn't care. It's not like the land is suddenly going to have to dip into its pockets to find more money to grow some more grass. The land belongs to the people. So on a legal, technical level, I think he's in the wrong. But I think on a much larger philosophical level, you have to start asking yourself, who does this government think they are? They are representatives of the people. I'm not saying that he should be given an exception. I'm saying we should look at the entire idea of charging the American people to graze their cattle on the land that they own through the agency of their government.
Well, legally speaking, Clive Bundy is a deadbeat scofflaw, and by today's standards, somewhat of a kook. But he raises some important questions, and the government's response to his delinquency raises some serious red flags. In particular, the existence of an armed-to-the-teeth land management bureaucracy, and the BLM's designation of so-called free speech zones, as if our natural God-given rights should exist within a government permission bubble. But the solution to all of this is not to let the government sell off Bundy's livestock, nor to have the federal government transfer all of its land to the government of Nevada. The solution is to get government out of the property business as much as possible. The federal government should not own 250 million acres of land. And another thing, at last count, the BLM grazing program was losing $120 million per year. Private ownership of grazing land would actually increase Clive Bundy's cost of operations, but private operators tend to manage their lands more responsibly than government. Better grass, cleaner watering areas, and well-maintained fencing. Plus, private landowners rarely show up with helicopters and AR-15s threatening to rustle your cattle. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.